Hello there! Now firstly I will mention sorry about the light. As you will notice, this is not natural lighting, it's artificial lighting and it's probably not great and the screen's probably a bit blurry. However, I've been meaning to film this video in the daytime for about a week now and I just haven't had time, and I finally conceded the point that I'm just going to have to film it at night time and deal with the light. So sorry about that, but it can't be helped. So this is my favourite video to film of the year, and this is my 2016 best reads. I've picked 10 and I've also got 2 honourable mentions, so I'm going to jump right in. Firstly on the honourable mention list is The Lover's Dictionary by David Levithan. I've read this twice this year, that's how much I enjoyed it. But because it is just little snippets of writing on each page, I felt like I couldn't say it was a favourite. But it's a really, really good book, and if you haven't read it, I would recommend it. It's a really quick read, you can literally get through it in like an hour. Basically, this chronicles a relationship and sort of the breakdown of that relationship and what's going on, and it sort of starts from the beginning and follows through. But the way it does it is that it is done in dictionary definitions, so we go through the alphabet and there's a few definitions for each letter, and David Levithan has picked certain words that relate to their relationship in some way. It's fantastic, the writing is beautiful. I haven't read any other David Levithan because I think he's sort of branded in with the John Green-esque kind of people. I don't like John Green's writing, so I have avoided picking him up otherwise, but this is a really good read and it kind of tempts me to give him another go. He's definitely a talented writer, to say the least. Then I have also got All My Friends Are Superheroes by Andrew Kaufman. This was a fantastic book, but because it is so short, again, I didn't feel like I could classify it as a favourite, but it is really, really good. This is magical realism, and again, it looks at the breakdown of a relationship, funnily enough, and sort of looks at this guy's, he looks back at all his friends and also his girlfriends, and they are all superheroes in some way, but he is a normal person. The writing in this was just fantastic, and it completely sold me. This is magical realism at its best, and I would definitely recommend again. So, on to the favourites. I've tried to kind of do this in order of the way I read them, rather than order of favourites, because I couldn't really pick between a few of them. I have got 2 that are by the same author, which is a bit of a cheat, I feel, but I couldn't not put them both in there, so I'm going to be doing those out of order of what I read. But other than that, it's all in order of what I read, and I will link down below any separate reviews I have done that I can find of books in here. So we're starting, I'm sure nobody's going to be surprised, by If Nobody Speaks of Remarkable Things by John McGregor. I read this last January and it started the year off on such a good reading note, so I was completely I just adore this book. It's probably my favourite book of all time, I would say so. So this is not to everyone's taste, and I know that when it came out a lot of people didn't like it, and I kind of put off reading it for years because I wasn't sure whether I would enjoy it. But I regret doing that because it is so, so good. I think a lot of people don't get John McGregor. They think he's kind of pretentious, and a lot of people don't like the fact that in this book you don't get the characters' names. But that is the beauty of it. He's not pretentious, in my opinion, with the things he does with language. He's just experimental, and I think a lot of people don't enjoy that. It's not really a plot-based book, but it follows the life of a neighbourhood, and something happens at the start in the neighbourhood that we don't know what it is, but it's something traumatic and something that sort of has an influence on everybody in that neighbourhood. And then we go back and we follow each individual neighbour and get to know their life stories. In between that, we also have sort of future after the event extract from one girl who has now moved away from the street, but she was involved in whatever it was that happened, and the whole book is leading up to the revelation of what that thing was. But that's not really the point of this. The point of this is, as the title says, it looks at the mundanities of life and sort of how important each of those are. And the language is what really sold me because it is absolutely spectacularly beautiful. And if you like beautiful language, you are going to like this book. I think go into it with an open mind. Don't think of it as pretentious. Think of it as experimental, and you will hopefully enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed it, and I definitely kept referring back to this book when I was looking at my other favourites of the year, and I'm glad that I started this one for this year. Then I have John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. East of Eden was in my favourites last year, and this one was actually even better than that one. I am just constantly amazed by John Steinbeck's writing. I would definitely say anyone who hasn't delved into the world of Steinbeck should do so immediately, because he is probably one of my favourite writers of all time. He's certainly the only writer who has 2 books in my favourites of all time. Although I say that, I've got 2 books by one author in this section, so there's a bit of competition there, but he certainly is. I've never read a John Steinbeck that I didn't love to pieces. So this looks at the sort of California rush, I suppose, where basically in Dust Bowl America, people weren't making money, there was no food, so they all flee to California. It's a really interesting look at immigration and the extremes that push people to try and find somewhere better to live, which is really interesting, I think, in this day and age, especially when I read it. That was a very topical subject, so it was fascinating in that respect. But it's also just beautifully written, and it's not a happy book, like it's Steinbeck. None of his books are happy, but it made me happy because it's so good, and just everyone should read it. I think it's one of those books that should definitely be on syllabus at school because it's just so important, and I think it's one of those books that's very timeless as well. So yes, there's that one. Then I wasn't sure if I was going to put this one in here, but I've got The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. Now, in terms of writing, this book is probably my least favourite on this list, but in terms of my enjoyment of this, it had to be on here. I think this is probably one of the books that I've been the most gripped with this year, which is impressive because it is so big that you just wouldn't expect that I would have been that gripped by it, but it was spectacular. People seem to have an opinion of this book that it's pretentious and heavy and literary. It's really not. Like, I would say it's not literary at all. It is literally just a fast-paced, mystery, thriller-y kind of read. Like, you don't know where you stand with any of the characters. It does fascinating things with sort of the look at what's good and what's not good and everything like that. And it's just so interesting. It's truly a page turner. So I think I probably love this book so much because of the time I read it. I read it literally the week after I'd given up work, so I suddenly had all this time on my hands, and it was just like a big blanket on that week, and I just adored it, and I will forever have fond memories of this. And I would definitely say, if you've been putting it off because you're nervous of the size of it or because you've heard bad things, give it a go. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised if you go into it in the right way. The only thing I would say, and it is like a soap opera in a book, but the only thing I would say is that there are a lot of characters, and I think some people who don't necessarily concentrate on what they're reading could feel completely bogged down in who's who. But if you read it and you concentrate properly on it, you won't be confused at all. It's fantastic. Then I've got another one that's gone straight onto my favourites of all time list, and that is The Crimson Petal and the White by Michelle Faber. Funnily enough, I got the series of this for Christmas, and I've watched one episode and I'm completely in love with that as well because it's just fantastic and beautifully dark. They've done it really well. Anyway, this is an amazing book. I've done quite a long review of this, so if you want to know more, review is down below. It was a pretty in-depth one because I got very passionate about this book. This is another one that's really big, but it's such a page turner and it's absolutely fantastic. It's hard to say what this is about really because it's about quite a few things, but for me what really came across was that it's pretty much about the way that men and women sort of influence each other and have negative effects on each other a lot of the time. It follows a prostitute called Sugar, and it looks in a really interesting way at the idea of Victorian prostitutes, and you sort of always see them portrayed as victims and sort of hiding in alleyways and fearing for their lives. And in this book it looks at the fact that that was the only way that women could be independent really, and being a prostitute was not necessarily a bad thing for those women. It was how they took their lives into their own hands, if you know what I mean, and it was the best way they could make a living for themselves, and they could make as much money as they wanted, and they had complete control over their lives. And it sort of looks at when men get involved in that situation and how they can twist things. It's also kind of a play on Jane Eyre in a lot of ways, and it's just one of these books that I think everybody should read. I can't imagine somebody not loving this, because not only does it look at some really interesting subjects, but it also is really easy to read. It's written in second person for a lot of it, but that's not always the case, and it's almost like we've got a narrator who is talking to us, the audience, in terms of you, which is really interesting and completely drags you straight into the story. And in the series, the episode that I watched, they actually use that, it's Sugar's voice, but they use that idea of talking to the audience, and it's really effective. So there's that one. Then I have my two by the same author, and that is, of course, Jeanette Winterson, because this year has just been a discovery year of Jeanette Winterson for me. There is another one that I read this month that I haven't yet spoken about that I could have included on here, but it didn't quite meet up to these two, so I'm going to add another one on there and have three of the same author. So, firstly, I got Symmetries by Jeanette Winterson, and it just blew me away. Her writing, what more can I say, really? She's a phenomenal writer. I would definitely say, if you have not tried her, give her a go. What I'm finding surprising about Jeanette Winterson is that she seems to always look at the themes of love and the idea of what makes love work and what makes love not work. And in this one, it is basically some kind of... It's a strange little love triangle where one woman is having an affair with a man and his wife finds out and contacts her. She then goes and has an affair with his wife as well. And it's sort of about how they come through that and how they feel and how they can sort of rekindle their own love without this other woman involved. It's really good, and as I say, the writing, I just couldn't not include it. Then I've also got The Passion by Jeanette Winterson, which again looks at themes of love and sort of different types of love and when love doesn't work out or when love is unrequited, and is just gorgeous. The plot for this wasn't the most gripping for me, but some of the paragraphs in here actually changed my life a little bit, and I fell in love with it. I will forever adore this book, and I think that's quite a feat considering that the plot didn't overly grip me, but Jeanette Winterson is my new bae. Then I've got Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. This was my first Daphne du Maurier and I thoroughly enjoyed this. Again, this is sort of a riff on Jane Eyre and looks at sort of the effect men have on women and sort of the overpowering nature of relationships. I'm sure everyone knows what this is about by now, but we follow an unnamed narrator and she ends up meeting a man and getting married to him. But when she goes back to his big mansion called Manderley, she realises that all is not as it seems, and his wife Rebecca, who she knew had died, starts sort of haunting her in a way, and she feels constantly jealous of Rebecca, and things ensue from there, and all is not as it seems, and it gets very gripping. It's very dark and just a fantastic, fantastic book, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing on my du Maurier journey. Then I have my only short story collection that made it onto this list, which is strange. And no, it's not Broken Things by Patricia Tarrant, although I did expect it to be. But when I was looking back through the books I had read, as much as that was my first 5-star short story collection and was very, very important to me at the time, because the stories in there were so short, I couldn't necessarily remember all of them. This one was just slightly ahead, and I could really remember all the stories in here, and that is The Vampires and the Lemon Grove by Karen Russell. This was my first Karen Russell, and I wasn't expecting to love her as a writer, but there's just something about the way she uses language and the ideas that she has that are just really, really beautiful, and I think I loved all but one story in this book, and it truly was a short story revelation to me, I think. So Karen Russell writes in a very intricate and deep and descriptive and luxurious way, and there's just... she's just phenomenal. Obviously, there's a story in here about vampires in a lemon grove. There's also a story in here about a tattoo telling stories. And there's also one about the American presidents all being reincarnated as horses. So there's a real variety in here. It's all magical realism-y, and it just completely blew me away. I haven't yet got any more Karen Russell, but I definitely intend to delve into her a little bit more. And then we've got A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing by Ima McBride. I wasn't sure about including this one, but in terms of what it does with language, I think it's a phenomenal, phenomenal book, and I think it definitely deserves its place on this list. So this is a stream of consciousness to the nth degree. Like, you couldn't get more stream of consciousness than this book. So if that's not your thing, you would not enjoy this. It's pretty much, for me, what I thought was that it was more like a prose poem than a novel, but it's absolutely spectacular, and the themes, again, it discusses are really interesting. So this is about a young woman who, her brother has had cancer when he was a baby, and I think he sort of still has it, or at least there's the risk of it coming back. And it sort of looks at how that shapes her childhood and how she feels about that, but also just how she feels about life in general. And there's other things that happen to her, like there's a really interesting look at abuse and the conflicting feelings that she has about it, because it happens at the time when she's starting to feel sexualized and she's starting to have those emotions, and she gets very confused about what's going on and why she's feeling the way she's feeling, and I think that was a really interesting look at a subject that is kind of taboo and wouldn't be spoken about very often, but I find that kind of thing fascinating to delve into, and it looks at how that affects her, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. And if you do not mind stream of consciousness, and especially if you like poetry, I think definitely give this one a go. Then finally, we've got Beloved by Toni Morrison. This was my first Toni Morrison and I adored it. I think that I'm going to be a avid Toni Morrison fan. I intend to read everything by her ever, because again, her language is absolutely spectacular and her themes are absolutely spectacular. I think I would like to reread this at some point. I think there's probably a lot of things that went over my head that I didn't particularly pick up on. So even so, I adored it. So this looks at, it's sort of Black America, and it's a family who we know that she's lost a child, but she is a single mother living with her older daughter, and her ex-lover comes back to live with them, and strange things start happening, and it's sort of a ghosty story, and it all gets a bit bizarre, but also it looks at sort of the way black people were treated, and slavery, and all that horrible, horrible stuff, but in a really, really majestically written way, and just the things this woman does with words, I didn't even know they were possible. So I would definitely recommend Toni Morrison to anybody. I think she's a very important writer, and I think she discusses some very interesting and heartbreaking subjects, but necessary subjects nonetheless. I'm not going to say much more about this because I went into it not knowing much, and I think I enjoyed it more because of that. So I'm not going to ruin anything, and going to leave it there, but read it and read all the Toni Morrison. I'm going to, definitely. So that is my favourite reads of 2016. I'm happy with the selection. I was a bit worried that I was going to struggle with picking books because it started off a really good year and kind of went downhill towards the end, so I didn't think I quite had 10, but actually when I was picking out I had more than 10 and I had to sort of whittle it down, so that was satisfying. So yes, please let me know what your favourite reads of 2016 were down below, and again, if you have made a video yourself, link that and I will check that out as well. And I hope you have all had a good Christmas and New Year, and I will see you next time. Bye!